Hi folks, welcome back again to which I think is the fourth in our Dharma Talks, Dharma Outreach program. Thank you for joining us, and we're lucky enough today to have a virtual guest with us. And I'll pass you over to Marshall to introduce him because I've only just met him, and so we're looking forward to that. Thank you for joining us, Marshall.
Hi everyone. Today CJ will be joining us, and I'd like to introduce CJ, and he'll be talking to us about some of his experience with Buddhism.
Hey, good morning or afternoon, adjusted for time zones. I am, in fact, CJ Dio. I live in Campbell, Alabama, if the accent doesn't give it away. And I've been out here doing community involvement and community outreach for the last, I don't know, way too long. But it's a good place to be in. Alabama is not exactly the hot spot of Buddhism in the United States for any chance. I am actually part of the Bright Dawn Buddhist Fellowship family. I trained with them back in 2015, 2016. We are descended from the Japanese lineage for the Shin Buddhist traditions and the Zen Buddhist traditions, kind of downstream from Akagarasu and Kiezawa Manshi. My Japanese is horrible, so don't even pretend like I'm saying it's correct. But really around here, the biggest thing is just helping people and being connected with people. One of the things that we kind of stress is the whole oneness angle, the joined by causes and conditions. The nature of life is oneness, and we're in this together. It's probably our biggest, if I had to sum it up in one sentence, that would be it.
Thank you for that. CJ, I'm kind of, as I've already said to you before we started recording, I'm not particularly knowledgeable on Mahayana. Theravada's my thing. So I'm looking forward to maybe learning some things from you today, as I'm sure other folks are. You mentioned that you're involved in outreach. How do you find that a Buddhist, and I take it it's Buddhist, obviously Buddhist-based outreach, how do you find that goes over? I'm obviously not from the US, and I've never been to the South. I hear stories. I'm intrigued as to how that whole the whole Buddhist outreach goes across with folks in the South there.
We are a bit weird. There's no denying it. I'm involved with a Unitarian Universalist church, actually several. The first Universalist was founded in 1846 here in Camp Hill, and they kind of have some cred here. They've been here long enough that everybody kind of knows that we're legit. On the flip side, everybody also knows that I'm this weird Buddhist minister running around Camp Hill. So they really don't know what to make of me half the time, but that's all right. Most of what we do, there's no theology attached to it. It's things like food pantry. We're still working to build a community center out of the parsonage, provide a place for people to come together. We have a 50% poverty rate in our community, so there's a lot of need here. And from, as I understand the Dharma, the idea is that the teachings come second. First off, you gotta make sure everybody has enough food to eat and have a roof over their head and that sort of thing. Then if they're interested, if they have an affinity with some of the teachings, sure, share them. But it's not pray to play in any sense of the word. So mostly, some people, I'm pretty sure, is convinced I'm going to hell in a handbasket here, but I'm still able to give them some food along the way, and I'm fine with that. Besides, what good would I do in heaven anyway?
Sorry, so I just want to say that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love what you're doing down there in Alabama, and like that's pretty impactful. 50% poverty rate. So it seems like the need is expansive, and that you're out there doing that work. That's amazing. Up here, we've noticed there's a lot of social services and things, foods offered and stuff, but we struggle with a lot of substance use disorder. We have homeless populations kind of spread out amongst some of the more urban areas and things. Like Dharma Outreach came about as we, as a nonprofit, we don't have like a lot of resources, but just to be able to connect with people and, teach them some of the principles of Buddhism and stuff. That's kind of what we came up with. But you definitely inspired me. Now I'm thinking like, well, what else can we do? And one of the things we found is, as far as like the Buddhist community out here, there isn't a lot of humanitarian work going on, which is surprising. So it really kind of it encourages me. It really brings my spirits up to hear that you're doing that. I have a question. Like, why Buddhism? How did you come to Buddhism to begin with?
Oh boy, that's a weird, long history. I never did quite fit in down this corner of the world. The idea of a all-loving God and the presence of suffering in the world just never seemed to be squared in my head. That's age-old problem in Christianity. And I remember watching a nature documentary one day, and a polar bear crawled out of the ocean and onto a piece of ice where there was a walrus stuck. And the polar bear was like starved to death, and her only choice was to attack the walrus and attempt to eat it. And her, of course, action was to defend herself. And she was as big as the polar bear. And one way or the other, this was going to end with either the polar bear being injured and left to finish starved to death on the ice, or the walrus being killed and eaten, and not necessarily in that order. There was just so much suffering, and for these two individuals, I'm sorry, this just did not look like the work of a loving God. And I began to explore different religions, explored a lot of different religions. I practiced Wicca for a while. I practiced all sorts of, you explore. But in 2006, I stopped drinking. And I don't know if I had a drinking problem or not, but I was well on my way to it. So I walked away from that, and I knew that I needed to pay attention to my mind if I was going to become, if I was going to maintain my sobriety. And in that process, I discovered Buddhism. I went to a local meditation group, and we chanted the Heart Sutra, and I was hooked. It was a beautiful 2,500-year-old tradition that had been field tested, if you'll pardon the expression. And one thing, if you know anything about addiction, there is no deception like self-deception. And having these, I love my sutras still. I don't look at them as if they're the word of the Buddha. I look at them like lab reports. They are documented cases of what other people have done and the experiences that they've had, and they're written in their own beautiful jargon. They're actually designed to be performed rather than read in the armchair anyway. But it was just this beautiful, rich tradition, and I couldn't think of ever going anywhere else. I mean, of all the religions that I know, I think Buddhism is probably the biggest tent religion there is, especially if you judge it from its literature. Just kind of kept exploring with that, and eventually I studied with a group called Prajna Institute for a little while. There was a Zen Institute, Korean Zen. Beautiful group of people, I have no regrets there. But the leader of it, they were not monastic in the sense of being celibate monks. And the head of the institute became a new father and had some health issues and stepped down. So I kind of floated around a little ways then, and eventually found Bright Dawn and joined them. I'd also already joined the Jodo Shu as well, which is a Pure Land group in Japan. So I guess I've poked around Buddhism a whole lot, but I've never managed or even thought about going beyond it.
CJ, that's amazing. All I can say is that was really well said, and I really resonate, and my heart's pounding out of my chest right now. So I'm gonna let Sujato pick up from there.
Thank you. It's interesting how we. I mean, so you've basically stuck with the same kind of. You've stuck with broadly the same tradition, and I find it interesting talking to people because. Anyone that knows me's probably fed up with me telling this story, but I I came to Buddhism through the Dalai Lama's smile. And this goes back before we had, before we had the internet, So I don't know. I've had a meditation practice for about 30 years, so it's close to that. And I couldn't even tell you how I first saw the pictures of him, but I looked into this guy, and this guy was always smiling. And as everyone that knows me knows, I have a substance use and an alcohol issue, or used to have, and probably still do. So I really wanted to know what this guy that was always smiling was on, because I really wanted to buy it and then market it. And so I kind of started off looking into Tibetan, and Tibetan soon, and no disrespect to anyone. I mean, there's many paths, obviously, that are Buddhist based. But it was too much for me. There was too much. It was exactly what a lot of Westerners like. There was too much. It was too flowery. There was too much ritual and ceremony. And then I found Theravada and didn't really go anywhere from there. So it's always interesting for me whether people, when they stay in one tradition or they move on, and I think whatever we do is just as valid. Because I certainly had no intention of ever. I lived in Thailand for 11 years, and I didn't go to Thailand on a spiritual quest or to go and be a monk. I went in Thailand to get off the crack pipe and stay out of jail. That's why I went there. So yeah, it's always interesting to me that when to find how people actually come to Buddhism in general, and then where they stay. And I'm really big on, certainly. I mean, I basically treat people the way they treat me, and I kind of live my life that way, and I always have done it really. But I find a lot of the, especially I'm not a big lover of social media, to be honest with you, but especially on social media, so many people, and especially in Buddhist groups, want to argue about which is the which is the number one, and you've got you've got the old chestnut about Mahayana guys calling Theravada Hinayana, and then Theravadans getting upset about it, and it's all quite amusing to me if they didn't take it so seriously. Yeah. So I'm just always interested in how people come to it. So thank you.
You're most welcome.
Yeah, and for those of you watching that might not know what Theravada, Hinayana, and Mahayana is translated. Hinayana is the lesser vehicle, Mahayana is the greater vehicle. Hinayana is you work to enlighten yourself. Mahayana is you work towards enlightening all beings and freeing them from suffering before you yourself become freed. But there's kind of, if you read a lot of the teachings, there's it's very intertwined. You see teachings, from Mahayana teaching and the Theravada, which they'll say is Hinayana, and then a lot of the Theravadan teachings, which is like the old, like some they say the oldest teachings, is all found in the Mahayana. So I guess there's probably not a lot of separation, and sometimes people think there is, and I guess people being people.
I think we're all just folks trying to do the best we can do on any given day, aren't we?
That's very true. Um, if I may jump in here for just a second, I so agree with you, and I think all of us are hinayana some days. I don't think it's all. I don't think. I think we've abused that word just a little bit over the years, because I don't really see the hinayana as being the Theravada. We all have moments when we're just wanting it to stop hurting. We just want to make everything all right. We're not worried about saving everybody. We just want to save ourselves. And I think we all slip into that view sometimes. In the Contemplation Sutra, when Vaidehi tells the Buddha that she just wants to be born somewhere where there's no suffering, in that moment, she's not worried about saving 10,000 sentient beings. She just wants to be okay. And I think that's a natural human response. I don't think we should demonize that. As I understand it, and the early history of Buddhism is going to be a matter of great debate for the rest of our lifetimes for sure. But in the Lotus Sutra, when the monks stand up and walk out because they think they've already heard the highest tradition, the highest truth, that's the mythological founding of the Theravada from the Mahayana point of view. All these texts was written well after the fact. And then, according to Paul Harvey, is it Paul Harvey? There was some guy with a very unfortunate name that wrote a book about this stuff. But, and not the news guy, but another guy with the same name. But the Mahayana began as a separate protest movement against the Mahasangha years later. The Mahayana didn't exist originally. And I mean, if this is true, then both the Mahayana and the Theravada both began as protest movements against the established Buddhist order. And we should realize that we're brothers and siblings or whatever, not that one of us is better than the other.
I think that's very true and very interesting. What you just said. I think in a lot of ways it's a shame that and it's great to hear you say that. I think in a lot of ways it's a shame that more folks don't actually see it that way. Because there is a lot of self-interest between various groups, and even groups geographically or so-called organisations, both monastic and lay, and I think when we're trying to do any kind of Buddhist-based outreach, as all of us here are, I think it's a great shame that there is this kind of barrier put up by a lot of organisations, and I kind of get some of it. I get some of it because the way the world is, everyone needs to survive, and organisations are no different. But yeah, so it's refreshing when I hear you say something like that. So thank you.
So, CJ, right now I'm trying to formulate a really good question. I'm trying to formulate a really good question. And I think, personally, like I'll talk about like my experience in coming to Buddhism. Buddhism resonated with me on a deep level of understanding kind of the corrupted thinking in my mind that kept causing me suffering. And I came from kind of like that technical kind of standpoint of like the precepts, the Noble Eightfold Path, like the Four Noble Truths, the defilements. Like I was able to understand that and see where the problems arose. And, I kind of internalized that and started developing it in myself. And, when you were talking about like the sutras as being kind of like an instruction manual or something like along those lines. And Sujatu talking about the Dalai Lama's smile, I started to recognize Buddhism as being, something that could bring myself to this, and I guess that is a selfish kind of want, this desire of wanting to just naturally be happy, not have to, feel like I had to chase something outside myself to make myself feel good, but develop like that natural feeling of happiness and well-being within myself. And I'm obviously not, no, perfected state of that, but my ability of acceptance and comfort with myself and being able to help others has improved over time due to Buddhism. And I just think that it's really beautiful to see that, us practicing Buddhism, it's brought us to the same place of having this intention of being able to help others and reduce suffering for others, like that kind of, like, would you say, like that Mahayana ideal of loving kindness, and I guess like a question would be, what do you feel as far as the teaching that resonates most with your current state of compassion, your current state of kindness?
Well, I can tell you what the most important teaching is. That's the one that keeps you on the cushion practicing. And it can be something different and is something different for every person. For myself, I resonate most with Pure Land schools. And that's strictly for myself. That's not even the oneness Buddhism that I practice or anything else. The real catch with the Bright Dawn approach that I really resonate with is the idea that we all can have these different approaches and can support one another. And we don't all have to have some kind of litmus test of belief. The reality is, if I'm in a group of 6 people and I'm sitting over silently chanting Namo Amida Butsu, and the guy beside me is counting his breath, and there's this one girl that's just trying not to run out of the meditation hall screaming at the top of her lungs, and my friend across from me, she's chanting the Diamond Sutra in her head. It doesn't matter. We can all share that space and support each other in our practice. And that to me is what I really like about this idea of oneness Buddhism. It's kind of a Unitarian Universalist approach. How we exist in relationship to each other is more important than religious dogma. For myself, I chant the name of Amida Buddha. It's the simplest practice I've found. It's actually rooted in the second discourse the Buddha gave, the 12 links of dependent origination. And it's based on this idea that being mindful of the Buddha in one moment, we're closer to the Buddha in the next moment. It's kind of apart from all of the mumbo jumbo and very straightforward. Some Pure Landers think of Amida Buddha as being this guy sitting on a lotus flower waiting for you to chant his name. I'm not quite that literal in my understanding. I also am not at the other extreme, as one writer puts it. I don't think of Amida Buddha as being this literary character that was just created to prove a point. Personally, my faith is in this process of liberation that embraces each of us as we are and moves us to greater clarity and greater compassion. I think of it in human terms because, well, dang it, I'm human, and that's how it's easiest for me to relate to something. But I hope that somewhat answered your question on a small rant, but yeah.
No, that was well said. I love it. Sujato, you got anything?
Do you know what? I haven't. I'm just intrigued listening because it's. I really am not. I'm really not up on a lot of this, and that's probably my fault. Well, it's definitely my fault. Maybe I should have taken more interest. But it's certainly incredibly interesting. I certainly agree with you that the emphasis is on practice, right? I mean, and that's not going to. endear me with scholars, but I certainly think that the practical application, in whichever way we use it and whichever way folks feel is a benefit, that practical application is essential to actually get anything from it. But having said that, if folks want to argue for days on a paragraph of the Pali Canon, they can do that, as long as I don't have to sit in the room with them. So it's refreshing to hear you say that about practice, because yeah, for sure, practice is what it's about.
All right, so CJ, I'm going to ask you one more question. We do a lot of work, people that struggle like with the substance use or in recovery and things. So my question is, what do you think would be good advice for people? Because people that might be interested in utilizing Buddhism in some sense as a spiritual practice, or maybe just as like a, like mindfulness, or just as like a personal practice in their lives. What would be your advice for them?
There's a lot that's probably self-explanatory about watching the mind and seeing how associations build in the mind, and hopefully finding ways not to be carried away with every association that comes up in the mind. I find meditation to be good for that. I mean, it's the idea that you find yourself in an argument with your significant other because you drive by a restaurant where somebody used to work, and this person's roommate owed somebody $5 that they never repaid. And soon you're in this big argument, and you don't even know how you got there. I don't think I'm the only person that's ever done that. And of course, when you take into account addiction and the way our bodies crave stimulation, it can be difficult not to follow those associations. You see something that reminds you of a good time, and before you know it, you're doom scrolling on the internet, and you just follow the trail breadcrumbs until you're back in relapse. I do find meditation is good for that. Not necessarily a long period of meditation, not necessarily a short period of meditation. Rather than to try to worry about how long you sit, it's probably more important to avoid notions of accomplishment and notions of self-power and achievement, because those can become toxic quickly in and of themselves, in my experience. It's better, and as far as I'm concerned, it's better if you can sit for 20 minutes a day and not feel like you've accomplished anything, than to sit for an hour a day and feel like, oh man, I am the bomb, I know how to meditate. Kind of counterintuitive there, but ego is really sneaky. Community is definitely a big one that we overlook, in my opinion. The three treasures are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Sangha is just a fancy word for community, and it's one of the three jewels. It's not an optional add-on. When people are asking what book should I read to learn about Buddhism, the first answer is none. You should get out of your chair, get out of your front door, and go and experience your local Sangha. Now, there's some great books, there's some great podcasts, considering where this is coming from. But, the reality is that by all means, your first response should be to seek out community and seek out people who will support you on the journey, because this is not a do-it-yourself spirituality. At the end of the day, if those people happen to be via Zoom or via some other social media platform, hey, so be it. But community matters. Those would probably be my first two suggestions.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and it's very poignant. And I remember when we first connected and started talking, I really resonated with you, and it's brought us here again. I feel like we're spiritual brothers on a path, and it's just really good to spend time with you again. And I really appreciate you coming on this show. So, I send metta to you.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I've learnt an awful lot in this 30 minutes, so I thank you for that. We are kind of for time. We try and keep to 30 minutes. So unless anyone's got anything else to say, I think we'll sign off. And folks, we will hopefully be back in 2 weeks' time. And again, CJ, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
It has been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.